are right at time for the webinar today. Thanks again for joining us for the Southern IPM Hour, Reframing the Narrative Around Food and Agriculture. The Southern IPM Center presents research issues and programs in integrated pest management from the Southern region. This one just happens to be more of a national effort, so really excited to be able to include all the regions in this talk today. And I am Kayla Watson. I'm the Communication Director for the Southern IPM Center. We've got one of our co-directors behind the scene, Joe LaForest, that's helping with tech. And we are one of 4 regional IPM centers supported by the USDA NIFA Crop Protection and Pest Management Regional Coordination Program. And we have a mission to coordinate IPM across the region. We're also housed at NC State University in North Carolina and UGA in Georgia, and in collaboration with regional stakeholders from multiple sectors in agricultural, urban, and rural settings to identify and address regional priorities for research, education, and outreach. So for the webinar today, our speaker has asked that we get a little bit more rowdy than we normally would with webinars, because we really want to drum up as much conversation around this topic as we can. So you have several different ways that you can ask questions. You can put it in the Q&A. You can also put it in the chat box. And there's also a raise your hand feature. And if you use the raise your hand feature, I can actually unmute you and you can talk to the speaker. So whatever you want to do. If you want to save your questions to the end, that's okay. But this is a webinar where you can also ask questions throughout the talk. So we would like to encourage you to do that as well. So again, welcome to the webinar. Our speaker today is Michael Rozyne. He's been a marketer of small farm products and a trailblazer in the good food movement for more than 3 decades. He worked on conventional and organic farms in Maine and was a purchaser and marketer for a regional food distributor in New England. He was a co-founder of the fair trade coffee company Equal Exchange. Michael started Red Tomato in 1996 and now works as Red Tomato's evangelist. In addition to that, he has continued his leadership at Red Tomato, and he also connects with others in the food movement by serving on the Fair Food Loan Fund Advisory Board and as the chair of the IPM Voice Board, along with his role in the Farming and Food Narrative Project. So welcome, Michael. Looking forward to your presentation today.
And thank you for hosting Kayla Watson and the Southern IPM Center. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. Let's get rolling here. This is the agenda we've got. The first part, I'm going to set the stage that leads up to the Farming and Food Narrative Project, and then we'll dive in, talk about its purpose, methodology, and some of the findings. That's the largest part of our content, but at the end, I'm going to apply some of those findings to a particular case study, an industry training that we recently conducted, and I'll give you all the gory details when we get there. And you can see the slide count there. I really encourage you to do what Kayla said. Jump in with your good questions and comments, add your experience. It'll make this go better. And if we really get into some of that, I've also reserved a bunch of slides that I can easily eliminate because it would be more interesting to just understand your reactions. There'll be a close at the end starting around 1:50, and we'll be focusing around the question of how can this project serve you? So Kayla's introduction really covered this, and I think the key part here is that recently, in the last 6 years, a significant part of my work at Red Tomato has been leading this national project, which you're going to hear about today. And in that project, I really have been in the role of facilitating a very transdisciplinary project and really understanding what it means when ag scientists work with social scientists, work with economists, and everybody has to really sit back and listen to a different language. So at Red Tomato, the first thing I want to do is provide the context that leads up to the narrative project. So at Red Tomato, our purpose revolves entirely around the viability of mid-sized farmers. We work in a 9-state region, and we have strategies aimed at providing them with new markets, differentiating their products, managing supply chains. Sounds like a business, right? And we are, but we're a 501c3 nonprofit business. And we do a lot of education work and doing what we're doing right now, which is talking about how to make this food system work better for farmers and consumers. EcoApple, the Ecocertified Fruit program, is our signature program. We've been operating this since about 2005, and it's a certification in ecologically grown tree fruits. It applies to apples and stone fruits. We have, over time, we've had 15 to 20 certified growers, 1,000 to 2,000 acres of participating farmland in a program that is aimed at explaining ecological farming to the public, differentiating these products so that growers gain access to markets, earn a little extra money, and become part of a learning community that really engages at a very, I'd say, intimate level, sharing information in order to benefit all the participants. As you know, here I am in a room full of IPM educators. So I hasten to say, I don't need to say how hard it is explaining IPM to the public, to policymakers, to almost anybody. So imagine this situation. We're in a store. I think this is a Whole Foods, and we're doing a demo of IPM advanced IPM eco certified peaches. And we very carefully explain the situation, how it works, how the farmers solve problems, what the benefits of this product are. And inevitably, we get back the same response. So let's see what you think. What do customers always ask after an explanation of eco or sustainable or advanced IPM fruit farming? What farm do these apples come from? When were they harvested? Do you have any other varieties? Are they organic? What do you think? People must have been looking over one another's shoulders, you know? I mean, come on. All right. So after doing my best explanation of integrated pest management, this is where earth-friendly farming meets local, blah, 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 all the things that you have said. Yes, indeed, that is the correct answer. And so a lot of what I'm going to do today is to try to apply the learning from the narrative project to situations in general and to this very predicament that really drove me into this project. So there was a time about 2015 when, after about 15 years of working really hard at the advanced IPM explanation, mostly in a selling marketing context, so which means explaining to customers, explaining to the public, I really had to just stop. I felt like we hit a wall. And I had to say to myself, this ain't working. We're doing everything we can. We're employing all the good writing, photography, slogans, rebranding, and we're making little bits of progress, but we are not effectively communicating with the public about ecological tree fruit. Why are we not communicating well? What is happening? So at this point, I really became a student of cognitive science, and I started reading everything I could get my hand on and realized that, you know, I've got all these really great working relationships with all these PhD ag scientists, and they can't figure this out. We really need a new partnership with social scientists. And so I began studying framing. And began to realize that it's not so much about any inner failings of our own marketing and communication. At least I need to address what's in the minds of the audience. So frames are the stories that we tell ourselves about how the world works, right? We all have them. We all interpret information this way. And we tend to see the world through the frames in our brains without noticing them. We're not like thinking, oh, I have this frame and this is how I'm interpreting. This is just what happens, and we have thousands of them going on. People's understanding of things is frame dependent. So here's an example. You can ask pretty much the same question two different ways and get a very different answer because they're being interpreted through different frames or mental models. So given the importance of free speech, would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? Said differently, given the risk of violence, would you favor allowing a hate group to hold a political rally? So look at the difference there. For me, a year's worth of really digging into this ended in an aha moment about the miscommunication or the lack of effective communication. When I was really able to say, it's not about us. Sure, we can do a better job, but that ain't what's happening here. This is more about what's in the minds of the audience and suddenly feeling like we have to understand it. We have to approach this effort to speak intelligently, to shift the mindsets of people, and so that they understand ecological tree fruit farming by understanding what's in their minds ahead of time. So it was kind of an admission that more information, better science, facts, slogans, clever slogans, those are unlikely to get the job done. So we had a clear picture, a clear problem statement. So join me right now. Think about your version of this. Think about the way in which ineffective communication is part of the challenge you face. It's a long bridge from that problem statement to a functioning project that can begin to address it. And this is what led to the Farming and Food Narrative Project. It began with a partnership of 3 organizations, Red Tomato and IPM Voice. And we invited Frameworks Institute into the group, and they really became the critical, actionable partner there. It's a think tank in Washington, D.C., made up of social scientists, linguists, cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, anthropologists, sociologists, and their job is translating complicated science. So I'll let you read it. Read at least the first paragraph there. And that became our purpose statement, which is then followed by a vision statement where we imagine more effective narrative elements that we can deploy to advance and promote sustainable farming practices. Focus here is on communication with the public. However, the reality is that, and this is, I think this is your reality as much as it's mine, is that lots of people today are so plain confused about the language around sustainable farming, right? So think about this, kind of put a average person's brain around food choices and farming and sustainable, and look at these arrows. Think of those arrows as messages coming at people, okay? Another way to think about what this project is trying to do is this. Look at the arrows on the right. We're trying to realign those messages so that all of us as communicators about sustainable farming are more or less heading in a general direction. And if we had our druthers about how we would see our project, it would be like that. Providing some tools and direction, but not expecting a whole series of messages to line up perfectly or to be highly similar, but to be heading in the same direction. And so this project started in 2015. We established a core team of 10 people that served as the management team for the project. And remarkably, over 6 years, we have still today the very same team that we did minus one person. Actually, very, very sadly, minus a second person, because one of our leaders, Larry Goot, who I think most of you know from MSU, the mating disruption kind of global specialist, passed away in September. Huge loss for the whole movement for our project. Here are some of the key funders here. You'll notice that the IPM centers have been really important to the funding of this project. And not only because of the sum they put in, but because their funding came through at a really vulnerable time for the project early on, when it was very hard to convince funders that communication mattered enough. Here it is 6 years later. It's a heck of a lot easier to say narrative matters than it was then. And the Southern IPM Center came in twice, and very much appreciated. Other key funders here worth noting are FR, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and two of the SAREs, Northeast and Western SARE. So here's what we did. We set on a path to conduct 6 years of social science research. And the first part of the research looks like this. We established a group of experts, and the researchers spoke to the experts with very open-ended questions. This is not polling. This is a research technique that leads with questions like, what's farming? What's important to most farmers? And then it drills down and drills down and drills down. So the first subjects were experts. And then a much bigger slice was to understand the cultural models, which are mental models in the context of a broader society. What are the mental models? What are the cultural models of average Americans? And for that, they interviewed people in all 4 quadrants of the country. And then they conducted a media, content, and field frame analysis, which is, so what's the media and what are lead organizations saying about those things? At the end of this, I'm going to show you the 2 pretty extensive reports that are available to you free online, where you can read the results here. So what I'm going to turn to now is the gap. What's the gap between what the experts think and say and what the public thinks and says? And when I show you the gap, I'm hoping that will begin to trigger and stimulate for you some of your own questions. And maybe you can bring in some of your own experience here. There's another gap that's really worth paying attention to. And that's the gap between what we say and what an audience hears. And there's a lot of difference much of the time. So here's an example. You say, farmers need our support to use methods that better protect the environment. And they are thinking, and what they hear is, yeah, that look familiar? And another example. You say, we need significant investments in agricultural research to ensure continued innovation in crop production. And they think, or they hear, and this reaction will show up again in this chart. So here we go, mapping the gaps. Okay. This is an example of the difference between what the experts think is important to communicate and what average American citizens are thinking about the same thing. So the general topic of farming, the experts, of course, see it as a complex practice with all kinds of expertise needed to really solve problems. And the public is saying what this person just did, which is, yeah, I recognize it's really hard, risky work, but it's, it's simple labor. You put the stuff in the ground, you water it, then you harvest it and send it somewhere. The effects of farming, the experts kind of following the definition of sustainability: economic, environmental, social, health. For the public, the effects are very much about my health. This is about what I put in my body. When it comes down to good farming practices, again, the experts are presenting a diversity of approaches and practices, different solutions for different contexts. And the public, following in their concern for health, is really focused on natural approaches, minimalism, organic is best. Okay. Sustainability, core concept for the experts, missing concept for the public. So, I can hear some of you saying, hey, what about all those market tests that say everybody is increasingly concerned about sustainability? And some of the Hartman reports, which are focused on sustainable marketing, say things like that. But I think remember, people were asked open-ended questions. They weren't asked a poll. Would you support the statement that sustainable farming is good for the country? Do you agree or not? It wasn't like that. They're asked about what they care about, open-ended questions. And in that sense, sustainability was missing. I'm going to leap forward here, and we will focus on pest management and pesticides together. The experts are very much focused in a problem-solving context, thinking about these as tools that growers apply. The public, of course, as you'd expect, is thinking about pesticides and the danger. And this is not acceptable. Soil management. Remember, these questions were asked probably 3 years ago. This research was done. And so this is a really shifting topic, I think, in terms of public concern. So the experts' central concern, and again, like sustainability, this is off the radar for folks. And time orientation, the experts are thinking of the future, and the public is focused really on their romantic version of the past. Kayla, do you have any questions?
We do have a question. I'm actually going to allow Roger to ask his question.
Hey, thanks a lot, Michael. This is an awesome seminar. I just had a quick question. Did you consider looking at the views of farmers in addition to experts? There could be a gap between what the experts are saying and what the farmers, how the farmers think as well.
Good point. Good catch there, Roger. Farmers were included in the expert pool. We had the ones you were kind of assuming, which are the land grant scientists, but we also had scientists growers in the mix. But I think your point still holds water. I think if it had been a group of all growers, it would have varied somewhat from a scientific expert pool. But I think in terms of setting this gap, the growers were right in there with the scientists in a very general way. Any other questions, Kayla, right now?
Not that I'm seeing.
Okay, so, when you're right here, you're kind of looking at it and it's like, okay, there's a lot of concepts there. How do we put this all together? And here's how our colleagues at Frameworks are training us to think about communications. Think of that public brain as a swamp. And that's not necessarily meant in any derogatory way. This is a different kind of ecosystem, right? But think about all the elements as a swamp, and here they are. These are the cultural models that show up in the report that I will share with you. Some of you may have seen it already, but It talks about, I think there are 24 cultural models, 4 of them much more foundational on the bottom left there. And these cultural models are explained in detail in the report. When you put them all together, you get the swamp of public thinking about farming. So it's helpful to understand them as cultural models because it gives you maybe some of the early tools you need to think about. So now what do I do? Knowing this is kind of overwhelming so far, not kind of helpful to understand this, and this leads us to a really important concept here, which is navigating through the swamp.
And Michael, we do have another question before you hop into that slide. Elizabeth was wondering, thinking about these cultural models, do you think that the experience of COVID and all of the supply chain problems and the talk of essential workers may have made a difference in the way that people are seeing agriculture and the way it works? Or if it made a difference at all?
I want to know what Elizabeth thinks because I have the evidence of a food hub selling into a marketplace for 2 years during that. And my experience is that people want more packaged foods and less, initially, especially, there was less interest in the loose bulk foods. But what I've really seen is that is shifting back. That was kind of a quick reaction. But the first reaction was, I need more protection. Actually, if you go way back, Elizabeth, you remember the first couple of months, people were washing a lot of people were washing a lot of produce. Then we learned about the reduced fear and harm and that wasn't necessary. Then I think the focus turned to more packaging. And now I think it's actually kind of leveling out. I'm just wondering, can we ask Elizabeth, what do you think?
And Elizabeth, I don't know if you feel comfortable talking, but if you'd like, I've given you the ability to talk. If you don't want to, that's okay too.
Hi. Well, I obviously don't have any clear answers, and I haven't, surveyed the public or had study circles to discuss it in detail. My impression is that at least among people who are members of CSAs, that they're more concerned about the workers on the farms. There is a greater awareness than there was previously.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm not sure how COVID connected it is, but I feel like that is a long-term trend that we've been feeling. And I think it's really rooted in maybe the late millennials, and Generation Z has a real strong interest, attachment, and values there. So I'm gonna move on here and say that the idea here is for us to be effective communicators, we have to actually navigate through that swamp. Navigate, I think, is the key word here. And some of the ideas behind that, recognizing that people are not blank slates, we just accept that these assumptions and these mental models, this is how the world works. This is how brains work. Some of these mental models that folks have are in the views of you as a communicator. You're going to see some of them as productive and some of them as obstacles, downright unproductive. So our colleagues at Frameworks insist that mental models cannot be defeated. It doesn't do any good to try to fix or correct people's unproductive models by presenting facts and direct counter arguments. But mental models can be navigated. And if you're doing a communication, you can navigate by avoiding particular words, images, themes that might trigger the exact unproductive models that you feel like you're up against. And remember the maxim, don't remind people of the thing you're trying to get them to forget. Here's a good example. 1974, President Richard Nixon, in his famous "I am not a crook" speech, trying to convince the American public that he was not a crook. But I think this is an example of a trigger word, and by association, by saying that, he was playing right into people's models who were thinking, gee, I don't trust this politician. And I think this is a trigger for mistrust. So these are the slides that I was going to run if we have time. And I'm just wondering, Kayla, are you getting more questions, or should we save more time for Q&A, or should we spend 5 minutes here with some particular strategies on reframing? What's your call?
I think the examples here that you have would be valuable. So if you'd like to spend that 5 minutes, I think it would be good.
All right. So here's a list of suggested things that don't work. One is the myth busting approach. So research shows, in a study of kind of the myth fact structure, and the citation is down below there, that people actually misremember. It's very common for people to misremember the myths as the truth. And as the presentation goes on and people see that myth busting more than once, the results get worse. In this case, this is something that the CDC put out. People attributed the false information actually to the CDC. So this study showed that it really backfired. Overemphasizing the problem. In other words, you have a communication. Some of it you have to present a problem, and then you're going to work your way towards a solution. Overemphasizing the problem just doesn't work. I'm going to let you read the captions here. Explanation, as opposed to, in one of the workshops that we're developing, we're calling attention to the difference between descriptions of things and explanations of things. An explanation, which actually tries to lay out causality, can be very powerful when well done, and they can really backfire if they're poorly done, as this caption shows. A splintered message, which in some ways is overcomplicating a message that could otherwise be simpler, in the interest of providing more and more facts, more and more, blah, 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 blah. You're splintering your message, and that loses people. So in the spirit of returning to the idea of IPM explanation, I wanted to share a wish that came up for me while I was working with Kayla on this presentation. I have a wish that the IPM community, as a national entity, and this may already be happening, but my wish is that the IPM communicators and advocates nationally would develop a talking point guideline kit, a tool that would take communication about IPM. It's probably not currently in a state that looks like this, but in communication with policymakers, that would move it here. And my experience working on the IPM Voice Board is that there's room for more work so that all of us IPM communicators are moving in a much more co-creative and coordinated way so that we can end up looking more like this. And I think, I bet you have too. I've been in conversations where when we start to think about this, people rush to almost advertising style solutions. we should change the name from IPM to IPPM, or it should be more like Europe, or this and that. And people start coming up with new names and new slogans. And I kind of feel like, whoa, 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 because I think that is avoiding the swamp that we have to navigate through, and assuming that all we really need is a better name, or a simpler name, or when in fact, I think the challenge really requires some pretty hard to manufacture explanation. We're on an explanatory path. When you think of, well, let me move on here, and then I'm going to get into this and kind of opening up territory that's really experimental at Red Tomato right now. This is the case study I wanted to share with you. And in this case study, we were invited. Whole Foods has been a supporter of the Ecocertification program that Red Tomato developed 18 years ago. And they've been a supporter ever since. And they invited us in September to do a training of 40 Whole Foods produce managers to help them do a better job explaining eco-certified to their shoppers. And so we use this opportunity to apply the learnings from the Food and Farming Narrative Project. And here's some of what we delivered. This is kind of a grossly shortened version of it, but it'll give you an idea. And it's an interesting approach in the sense that, I think what we have to do in the world of IPM is to navigate with explanatory narrative through that swamp. Another approach, a different set of standards, would be to just completely skirt the swamp and to completely avoid all of the dangerous territory, which is what an advertisement might try to do, or what certain brands might try to do. But I think for those of us who are IPM educators or who are handling products like we are, ecologically grown tree fruit, we have to master explanatory narrative. It's not enough for us to completely skirt questions that are really meaningful. Red Tomato as a nonprofit is not going to take that approach, but I also don't think it leads us where we want to go. So let me queue up some questions that will lead us into this case study. Let's see if you got an A+ on the last one. Let's see if you can hang in there. Question 2, what percent of all the apples that Whole Foods in the North Atlantic region, think about New England, will sell in a year are certified organic? What percent of all the apples that stores in that region will sell are certified organic? Kayla, should we do these two together?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I actually have questions 2 through 4 in the same poll here.
All right. Question 3 is, what percent of those apples are local or regional, which means from the same region?
We've also got the last question there. What percent of the apples are both organic and local or regional?
So the answer to number 2 is 75 to 80%. The answer to number 3, local regional, is 15%. And the answer to number 4, everybody got right, fewer than 1%. And that really taps into, I think, everybody's knowledge of production in our region. So what we're doing here is trying to give them language that they can share. This, not so much with this statement, but I wanted to show you, because the eco-certification really is a hybrid between a certification and a brand. In other words, it shows up on the package. Look at the way it is on the package there. It kind of plays the function of a brand And we're actually moving it in slightly in the direction of a certification. But we worked with the Hartman Group, which is kind of the nation's leading marketing research company on sustainability issues. And working with them, we came up with this positioning statement. Our slogan is local, done right. And this is the positioning statement: a community of farmers, scientists, advisors, and eaters passionate about growing fruit in ways that are best for their locale. And these are kind of the points that we wanted to convey. This is kind of the very simplified version of what's eco-certified. So we talk about ecology, science, pollinators, and biodiversity, and soil health. And conspicuously absent after 20 years of this, I am no longer trying to explain advanced integrated pest management when I'm standing in a store giving people a taste of a freshly harvested Evercrisp apple. Hard to give up, but these are points that we hope will be more memorable for a produce manager. Here's the last polling question. So which explanation do you like best? This is your final exam, and there's no right answer, but I'm curious what you think. Eco-certified is local and sustainable together. Eco-certified is farmers using ecology and science to minimize spraying, build healthy soil, and protect bees. Eco-certified is based on advanced practices of IPM, integrated pest management. Growers use natural controls first before they spray. Okay, great. When customers ask me, are they organic? I say no. And these eco-certified apples are grown with the same goals in mind. In the Eastern US, ecological farming or sustainable farming is the best way to raise apples and peaches. And then eco-certified is the way to have local and sustainable together in a New England apple. So before we jump here, are there any questions about that particular case study or in general?
So I have a question for you, Michael. When you were doing this case study, how did you set this one up? Was it just to shoppers that would come into Whole Foods, or?
Well, I mean, this was a webinar. This was an online webinar just like this one with about the same number of people. We had just over 40 people attending. And so we don't really, this was not kind of research in the sense like we didn't get to go out and figure out whether, but we actually used Zoom polling more than I showed you. And the Whole Foods managers we worked with in design really encouraged us to use Zoom polling throughout the whole, just as a technique to keep people awake, to keep them focused and attentive on, because presentation on scientific principles is not really what store managers want to do with their lunchtime. But the feedback was good. I mean, I think we've come a long way in the 20 years we've been working with Whole Foods in terms of what we're expecting them to be able to say.
What I like about this group that we have on this call today is that they seem to be a pretty diverse group. And they, in the last question that we did, it's funny that they kind of landed somewhere in the middle. So not quite super simple, but not quite super IPM either. So at least we might have gotten to them a little bit. But we do have another question that's coming in the Q&A now. And Roger would like to know, do you ever get pushback from the public asking if you can justify that your farming is ecologically based? Or did they continue to press you about it when you answer in this way?
I mean, we at Red Tomato are really stepping up our direct contact with consumers. I think one of the hard pills for us to swallow in the last few years has been that we just cannot rely on our customers as go-betweens with their customers. So, Roger, I think we're just beginning to communicate directly with folks through social media. I hope we get practice at exactly what you're talking about, so that we really engage at least the core consumers. You know, I mean, you just can't expect most consumers to really engage at that level. But if 3 to 5% of them do, even if it's not all pleasant and comfortable, I think that'll be a real step progress. But we're not far enough down that road. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to keep moving ahead, Kayla.
Yeah, it looks like we're right at that 150 mark. So.
Okay, great. So, this is the part where I deliver on, I don't know if you caught a promise for a little bit of entertainment. So in my moment of really scratching my own head about how can I communicate IPM, how can I break through or get through to people, I spent a little time writing a spoken word rhyme. And in this rhyme, I am explaining, this is actually a slice of a longer rhyme in which I'm the farmer. So I'll take off my organizational hat and put on a farm hat here. And I have noticed that I have a neighbor who is staring at the window every time that I'm out in the early morning spraying. And I've been feeling a lot of mistrust coming at me. And this rhyme is about the year in which our relationship improved. And I began to explain what I'm doing and why and when and how and where. And most of that you won't get in the rhyme, in this piece of the rhyme. But in this piece of it is actually where I'm explaining ecological and IPM principles. So here I go. Eco principle 1 is measure first, do nothing yet until you've established an intolerable threat. How do I stay chill when the bugs have my attention? I trade a pound of spray for an ounce of prevention. Eco principle 2 is prevention. Think ecological. My farm's alive. I've got to be knowledgeable about my crop's enemies and their enemies. I go for balance. Leaving chemicals on the shelf, I use my biological talents. Now, a warning for parents. This next part's rated X. It's about saving my orchard by inhibiting sex. The villain, the coddling moth, could cause catastrophic loss by doing what we do, feeding her young applesauce. This moth lays her eggs near the fruit that she sees. Her only agenda is reproducing her species. The grub's born, it looks around, so far nothing remarkable. But a day or two later, that fruit is unmarketable. Well, that is intolerable. It's something I must act on. So I tackle this problem with my eco hat on. Pheromones are what coddling moths make to communicate. It's the perfume they wear when they search for a mate. But if I send out pheromones at an accelerated rate, I can keep them from mating. They won't even date. This clever technology, mating disruption by name, is like having my very own abstinence campaign. That's dedicated to Larry Goot. our world specialist in mating disruption. So I kind of want to tell you where things are at with this project. We are in the final furlong of the 6 years of social science research. And we are doing what's called prescriptive research, which means that they are now designing, testing the frames that will hopefully be part of the toolkit that we put together and offer the world of educators, communicators, growers. And that should be available by May 1st of this coming year. So lots to look forward to there. These are the two reports that I referred to. The one on the left is about the cultural models and the mapping the gaps. The one on the right is what the media and organizations are saying. You can access these all through the website here. You can also sign up for our newsletter, periodic updates on what the project is doing and what we're offering. And most important of all now, if you have specific ideas and inquiries about how interest you have in utilizing what will become guidelines and tools for communicating effectively on sustainable farming, send an email note to Kelsey and me. 2 email addresses here below. I would ask you to do this. We're going to be doing a lot more presenting of this, and I would love to hear from you in 1 minute. Send Kayla a note and just say what worked and what didn't work for you so that we can build this webinar to be more effective. Send that note to Kayla Watson. Thanks for coming. Let's keep the conversation going. In fact, Kayla and I both are available to stay a little bit beyond 2. So if people want to keep talking, well, we can either open things up if it's a small group, or we can keep on using the chat box. But I'll stay beyond 2 for anyone who wants to keep talking.
I did also open up just a short survey for us, if you wouldn't mind just filling that out. It's super quick. Just making sure that we're hitting the mark with these webinars. To me, this might have been the best webinar so far for me, but I'm a little bit biased since I'm a communicator. But so if you wouldn't mind to spend just a couple minutes on this survey. And as we said, if you have any questions, you are free to put those in the chat or the Q&A, or raise your hand. And Michael, I just wanted to let you know too that you had a lot of applause that you couldn't hear after your spoken word there. So that was awesome. And I think everybody enjoyed it a whole lot.
Good.
So yeah. You couldn't hear the applause, but it was there.
Thank you all. That's great to hear. Thanks.
I'm giving people just a couple minutes to finish this poll and see if we have any more questions. So thank you for doing that. Of course, I also want to say thank you to Michael Rozyne from Red Tomato for spending time with us today and really digging in with the research that they've been doing for the Farming and Food Narrative Project. Michael, I'm not seeing any more questions, but I'm sure people are going to reach out. And if it's okay with you, we'll have a recording of this available after the event. Okay. Great. Okay. Yep. Yeah, we'll have the recording available. And so Ashley just asked if we will be sharing recording. We're going to put it up on our YouTube page, and you should get an email directly from Zoom since you were a part of this webinar with a link to that. And feel free to share it with whoever you think would benefit from it. So we're definitely going to have that available for you. And the next IPM hour, the next Southern IPM hour will be coming up the first Wednesday of the month in February at the same time at 1 p.m. So Michael, if you could have everybody leave with one thing today, what do you want them to take away from this presentation?
Well, where we're at right now, I really want people to think about what they need from a resource like the Farming and Food Narrative. We're entering a period where we need partnerships with educators and groups and farm and food networks who really see communication as a breakthrough issue. So we need connection, ideas, requests, questions.
So we need to know what you need.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. And thanks to everybody that attended the webinar today. We hope to see you soon, and we hope that this information will guide you with your future endeavors. So thank you.